Do you ever feel like your loved one's substance use is making you crazy? Or do you react to their use in ways that don't feel good to you or that you're not proud of? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then this episode is for you, because this leads me to reason number 9 of why I do what I do. Hello, welcome. I'm Madeline Craig, an educator and life coach for families struggling with a loved one's drug or alcohol abuse. And this is another episode of my video blog, which I call Hope for Families TV, because I intend for all of my work to offer you hope in what I know can be a very dark situation. And this is episode number 9 in my Why I Do What I Do series. So here we go. I do what I do because addiction creates dysfunctional relationship dynamics in the whole family, such that family members begin displaying similar symptoms as the substance user. In other words, you could say that in a way, family members kind of get sick too. Now, it's not always easy to realize this because the behavior driven by addiction is far more obvious. But you may be surprised to learn that family members actually do display similar symptoms as their loved one abusing substances. So to demonstrate this, in this episode of Hope for Families TV, I'm going to present 6 symptoms of substance use or substance use disorder, and then show the ways in which family members often mimic them in unsuspecting ways. And I think you'll find this to be rather revealing. So let's get started. The first symptom of addiction is obsession. The addicted person is obsessed with the substance. If they're not actively using or consuming it, they're thinking about using it or consuming it, when they're going to do it, how they're going to do it, where they're going to do it. And this obsession goes hand in hand with the excruciating cravings for the substance that a person experiences. All right, so what does obsession look like in families? Well, with families, family members become obsessed with the addicted person, and they experience excruciating, persistent thoughts and fears around the addicted family member and their behavior. So that's symptom number 1. Second symptom of addiction is increased tolerance. So the addicted person requires more and more of the substance over time to achieve the same effect. And after a while, they actually never achieve the initial experience they first had with the substance. All right, so what does increased tolerance look like in family members? With family members, increased tolerance becomes increased tolerance for the addicted family member's unacceptable and shocking behavior. So family members tolerate behavior from their loved one abusing substances that they would never, ever even remotely tolerate from someone else. So that's the second symptom. All right, the third symptom of addiction is loss of control. The addicted person loses the ability to control their use of the substance. In other words, once they start, they can't stop. So what does loss of control look like in families? With family members, they lose the ability to maintain other important aspects of their lives. They too become increasingly isolated as other meaningful activities and relationships fall by the wayside, and everything revolves around their loved one using substances. All right, so that's a third symptom. The fourth symptom of addiction is persistence. The addicted person persists in the use of the substance despite the negative consequences. All right, so what does persistence look like in families? Well, persistence in families is family members persisting in their efforts to control, that is, to force a solution or to make their loved one change, despite overwhelming evidence that control doesn't work. And this just increases despair. So if you've been following my work, you know that I talk a lot about how families have influence, but this is not the same thing as control. Influence is kind of a soft power, but it's not control. We're not trying to force anything. We're just trying to create positive conditions for it. So that's a fourth symptom. All right. The fifth symptom of addiction is loss of pleasure in normally pleasurable things. So because of the progressive reduction of dopamine receptors in the brain of an addicted person, the person cannot find pleasure in normally pleasurable things. And consequently, they become increasingly isolated and they experience more despair. Loss of pleasure in family members actually looks fairly similar. Families lose pleasure in normally pleasurable things. And they do this as they see the addicted family member as the central focus of their entire lives. What's the addicted family member doing? What's the next thing that's going to happen? What's the next thing that's going to go wrong? And in the mix of this, family members lose the ability to enjoy life in both simple and grand ways. So that's the fifth symptom. And then finally, the sixth symptom of addiction is avoiding pain. The addicted person uses a substance to numb emotional pain and mitigate the stress the consequences of their use causes. So what does avoiding pain look like in families? With families, family members use their efforts to fix, control, and even berate the addicted person for the destructive behavior in order to avoid their own pain, to avoid grieving the reality of their loved one's disease, and to avoid coping with the fear of additional tragic consequences that could arise. With all of these symptoms that family members tend to mirror to a greater or lesser degree, family members do these things that mimic the symptoms of addiction in the desperate hope that they will compel the addicted person to stop. And for good reason. Addiction can be deadly. We are all well aware that if our loved ones continue their use, really, really, really bad things can happen. And the truth is, family members are faced with an enormous catch-22. The reality is, without effective support and pertinent information, our typical reactions to our loved ones' uses often make it easier for the addicted family member to persist in their use. But responding differently can feel terrifying. But families do need to respond differently if they wish to have a positive influence on the use. And sadly, there are no guarantees. As family members, our only option is to do what we can to improve the chances and support our own healing. And all of this is another reason that effective support is so important for everyone. More importantly, the fact that families end up mimicking the symptom of addiction is one more reason why we will never resolve the addiction crisis unless and until we make whole family healing an essential part of the solution. So I'd love to know, did you see yourself at all in some of the ways that family members mimic the symptoms of addiction? If you did, I invite you to share in the comments below some of the ways you might be mimicking your loved one's symptoms of addiction, if you feel comfortable. Give examples and feel free to comment respectfully on what others have shared. So I hope that was helpful. Thanks for watching.